Welcome back to the program. If you're just joining us, it's about gender debate in the country. And remember that the court did pronounce itself yesterday, and it is the question of Parliament being given 60 days or 2 months, if you may, to implement the gender rule. If not, it risks being dissolved. And in studio with me is John Second. She's a lawyer by profession. She's also an author, an American author for that matter. And what a time, an opportune moment to have you, Second. Welcome to the program. And I want to believe, good morning. I want to believe you're enjoying your stay in the country. How long have you been staying in Kenya?
I'm 53, and I've been married to a Kenyan.
Wow.
Since, well, I met him, I was 19, so I've been part of Kenya ever since. So I think that's quite some time.
Quite some time.
Yeah. I served Kenya in many different areas. Mm-hmm. I've been on the Kenyan National Committee of the United World Colleges since 2004. It's my education. I've also chaired the parents' associations of both my children's schools, Kenton College and Hillcrest. I run a conservation NGO called the Wildlife Foundation. Mm-hmm. I've been a member of Friends of Nairobi National Park since its inception in 1995. I write continuously and publish 3 times by your illustrious publisher, Mr. Berk Maluka. Mm-hmm. He's my publisher. I'm probably his last title. I could go on. I could go on how I'm serving this country.
The list is endless. So you are a lawyer by profession. Have you ever practiced as a lawyer?
I did. I practiced in the United States of America. I was formerly a Reagan appointment, actually, for the United States Court of International Trade. Mm-hmm. The World Trade Organization, the big thing in the 1980s was the World Trade Organization. Internationalism was just, well, was having a big push. And my court has my jurisdiction, was a jurisdictional piece of the WTO. I also worked in World Trade Center for some time as part of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. Mm-hmm. I was a litigator. Mm-hmm. And then I worked severally in New York City in many different jobs in the iconic skyscrapers, the Channon Building. I worked there in securities litigation as well, then in civil practice. So
you have a lot of practice in law. Currently, as a country, we're grappling with the question of gender rule because the Constitution requires us to ensure that two-thirds gender principle is implemented in the country. How is the situation in the United States when it comes to the question of having women elected as leaders? Because as our country, we seem to be facing a lot of challenges.
You're looking at, yep, that's me. I'm a Korean American.
Yes.
And in Korea, you know, my story is, I mean, I'm very fluent in English. I don't speak my language. Mm-hmm. And of course, Korea is very much in the news. We have our brand, Samsung Corporation, Samsung devices. You know, from what I remember as a childhood to now is a huge change. I was born as my parents' 4th daughter. And in that sequence, there was a lot of heartache because I failed to be a boy. I failed to be a male child. Mm-hmm. And in the current consequence of gender, at the time that my parents left Korea, it was still very feudalistic. And Confucius, the Confucius way of life was there for many thousands of years. And Confucius really didn't speak a lot about women at all. Mm-hmm. When he finally spoke about women, you know, women had to obey three men: her father, mm-hmm. her husband, and her son. Her father would choose her husband, and you produce a male. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm here in Kenya, and just the other day I was in Masai Mara, and you know, you see the wildebeest was giving. There was an elephant, and she was rumbling all night long, and morning she gave birth. So, you know, the whole fabric of family is vanished. I was recently in New York. I was attending a reception, and as you may know, that there's this new advocacy called LGBT, lesbian, gay, transsexual. Now the new in the United States is what they call transgender, which is neither male, which is neither female.
But in terms of gender representation, when you look at House of Representatives, for example, or institutions of representation in the United States, do you think that women leaders are at the forefront? For example, we had Hillary Clinton vie for presidency the other day. But do you think that if you go to the institutions of representation in the United States, we have a lot of women who can articulate issues or challenges that are affecting their fellow women at the grassroots?
There's no question. My mother never expected anything more out of me than to get married and make kimchi. You know, I'm doing 10 zillion things of which my mother, who remains, had no concept. We're changing. That's my point. You see, we're shifting. We're changing. We're changing as a planet. You know, when the 60s and the 70s occurred, and you had the huge women's movement, it was called feminism in the 60s and 70s. There was no pushing back on it. When I went to law school, I had an opportunity to go to the Supreme Court and meet the first female Supreme Court Justice, Mrs. Sandra Day O'Connor. And you know, by that time, I'm scholarship all the way, which is why I serve the Kenya National Committee of the United World Colleges. Great things happened in my life with the opportunities of democracy. One of which was a scholarship to a great university. I went to Brandeis University as an undergraduate. And I achieved all that without a penny from my parents. All I did was, you know, I filled in the forms. I said who I was, you know, Miss Pack, whatever my address was. You know, the opportunities just kept going. My parents had no idea. They were like, what? And so women are changing, and we can contribute forcefully, powerfully to the democratic process. You know, we're changing so significantly in our time. You have to respond with new advocacy, with new constituents. Women are contributing powerfully to the current time. You cannot push it back. But the issue is, how do you balance?
So the question is, how do you balance?
How do you balance it? You know, when you legislate this kind of, you know, three-quarters rule, well, then you have a big issue on minorities, for example. I mean, well, then you have to have three. I mean, look at now. You know, NASA needs a flag bearer. Well, you know, and then you get all this conflict. You know, I think that, from my perspective, women can do it on your own. Why are you legislating it? I mean, if you're going to be there, be there. And to present quotas or to demarcate on gender in a country which is tribalistic, well, then you're going to open the door to a lot of different issues. In any case, it's an election year. You've got to make everyone happy, and women certainly make up at least 50% of the vote. So representation should be fair, but I think it should be merit too. It's got to be merit based. You can't just, you know, just because you can't just take backs.
If your fellow women are listening to you. But when you talk about merit, there are those who argue that Kenya as a country is that is more of patriarchal, and there are a lot of challenges that women face in terms of wanting to, you know, assume elective positions. So how do they then navigate those challenges? Because we're talking about ethnicity, we're talking about, you know, things to do with gender violence and all those kind of challenges.
How do women get there?
How do they navigate?
You know,
how do they
navigate
those challenges? Yes.
Well, by being your best. You know, every day is your challenge. You know, and again, as I say, I think, did I ever take advantage of like gender parties? Well, you know, I did. In 1980, I did go to college. I think I had some preferential legislative. I think I had the guaranteed student loan bill. I think I was part of affirmative action at that time. And now here, MIT is made in Taiwan, you know, like all the universities in America. Now if you're Asian, there's a cap, you know, get out. Now we want white guys, you know, so how the balance works. Again, if I can go back to my philosophy in gender and where the balance there lies, and why I am Mrs. Secan with this kind of marriage kind of thing. Remember, the family is an essential unit of any nation. In the United States of America, I'm told by many of my colleagues, women colleagues, for example, there's no such thing as the traditional family anymore. It's shown the door. That's why I was referring to, you know, the dynamics, the shifting demographics of the United States. So you got to balance it. And remember, what's going on in Kenya and East Africa is so recent. It's such a recent thing. You know, one of the things I do is conservation. You know, I get little elephants in my ears. You know, I love your creatures. And I love your creatures because, you know, my dad was a Christian in South Africa. It's so recent. It's such a recent thing. You know, one of the things I do is conservation. You know, I get little elephants in my ears. You know, I love your creatures. And I love your creatures because, you know, my dad was a Christian. And, you know, in the beginning, God created, you know, the creatures of this country are fantastic. One of the big challenges is how you balance, you know, the traditional, you know, local cultures, your original cultures, your indigenous people, and the modern age. So how fast do you want to go? And again, I don't want to say anything to, you know, my fellow women, but I would like to call on sobriety. I would like to call in rationalization. I would like to call in a little balance, a little bit of honesty on women today, and be fair, you know, on what we're asking for politically. You know, is it really in question? Just question, and let's debate it. I'd like to come back and let's debate it. You know, what's in the best interest of society? What's in the best interest of the future? What is in the best interest politically? You know, if we really do want a balanced and fair democratic nation. So gender, legislated gender quotas. I mean, I think there are necessary legislative interventions. Right now, I want interventions like hell on conservation. The women's debate in Kenya, you got to think where it's going to go and what the impacts are.
So the question of, when you talk about balance, especially between culture and modern, whatever is happening in contemporary society, and that seems to be a delicate issue if you look at it practically speaking, how do you ensure that, what are some of the methodologies that you want to advance to try and perhaps ensure that there's that balance, you achieve that balance? Because those issues that one will say are delicate when you talk about culture versus modernity.
You have to keep discussing the issues. The first fact is, again, I am evidence of the fact that women are not what we were. Okay, again, I write a lot. I'm going to be launching another book. I mean, I love being active. I love using my mind mentally. Women are not what they were. You know, you can't really put them back in the box, that Pandora's box. But you've got to balance it. You've got to keep the debate. How do women navigate their way forward up the corporate ceiling? I think that's a case by case kind of situation. But you know, I really do beg, you know, our society today. I beg our society today. Can I go back to my experiences in education and what's going on in child welfare, which is extremely damaging. I mean, it's a very disintegrating, degenerating, dysfunctional kind of condition. You know, where young people today are born simply to satisfy their parents' agenda for them. It's a horrible condition, you know, where young people today, especially from the time they are born, I'm told 2- and 3-year-olds have to sit for examinations to get into the preschool. This is in India, this is everywhere, because, you know, we're living in a very complex society. Right now, because of devices, our employment market has shrunk to about maybe 1/10 of what it was 1990, 2000. Then come 2004, the devices. And those things have wiped out, what, 60, 80% of all low-labor jobs? So that means that, you know, in education, for example, only the top maybe 0.2%, the top 3 who get the A stars, okay, those kids matter. Now, you get it. I mean, poor Joho with his D-. I mean, you know, I wouldn't say I'm proud of my background. Yeah. I'm proud of scholarship.
You can as well be proud of your D- if that's what you got.
I'm proud of my scholarship. I'm proud of the fact that I did not get parents that could write the check. But that's what's going on. And the depression which is occurring now in pediatrics is huge. Is huge. What are you getting out of that in the future? You know, you're getting individuals that are, you know, one of the reasons why you got this Korean American here in Kenya. So I used to do a lot of youth welfare. I did a lot of child welfare because my dad, you know, was a Korean pastor, so I was really good with kids. I love children. I love children. And, you know, in the United States of America, you get psychiatric attention to 2- and 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, you know, because they're already exempt. I mean, if you want to look at autism, dyslexia, you know, women in the workforce, family dysfunction. These are all parallel kind of statistics.
And when you talk about the question of literature, because that also say that there's nothing powerful like writing and expressing some of these issues through writing, do you think that women have a chance to use the power of literary discourse to try and push the agenda forward?
Absolutely. Now look, but then again, tempered by what? There's a new feature in literature called publishing called chick lit. I mean, again, I would like to see a more balanced kind of feminist perspective. Something that's taking into consideration something a little bit more than a personal agenda. If you want to take a look at publishing, it's dominated by women. It's dominated by women. You hardly see a guy anymore.
Are you sure of that?
Well, according to my titles, my experiences, sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm part of Poets House, Poet Society, all the poets featured in these structures in the United States. I mean, I would say quite fairly, women are gaining. Women are gaining very, very strongly in these areas. So, and what is failing again? I mean, I'd like to point out, what's going on now in Kenya. And why I'm really proud to be part of Kenya is because the future of this country is enormous. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Again, early childhood pediatric condition. Now, when Kenyan children are born, again, it's this wonderful quality of low GDP. Mm-hmm. It's still very national. The economy is very young. You can't afford a babysitter. And, the young Kenyan mother will pop that little baby on her back and tie her up. I tried that once. It's tough because, you got to balance it on your butt. I don't really have a hip. And yes. My baby slipped and fell. It was a terrible thing. Bruises. Mm-hmm. But, that quality of bonding with your child, remember what's going on in an early pediatric condition is that the brain matter of that individual is multiplying its fastest between the ages of 0 and 10. Mm-hmm. So when you have that early childhood bonding, as the Kenyan women will do in the villages, what occurs then is that everything is good. The cardiovascular, the immune, the skeletal, the sensory. These things are just beautiful because of the warmth of that woman. Like I find when I'm back in New York that in the lower economies in the immigrant neighborhoods where you're not finding childcare, as opposed to New York City where you're finding two career parenting, the children in the lower areas and the lower economic areas have a lot more dedicated parenting, which is, of course, if you want to take it from a pediatric perspective, lends itself to much more confident children and better equipped to handle the challenges and the pressures of our age today. And that's the benchmark, I would say, at least in part, of the women's movement. Well, the corollary, there are many tangential. I'm Mrs. Joan Pack, I don't know what's my name. Mm-hmm. Anyway, look, I can do it. I could be a big top lawyer. Mm-hmm. But then the issue is that you have to analyze how the repercussions are to society, mm-hmm. and very much what's happening in child welfare. And marriage, well, what the heck is going on there? Mm-hmm. Because you see, women are in the workforce. We are represented widely. We are effective, highly effective. What's going on in marriage? I mean, you got to create. You have to continue that debate. Mm-hmm. You got to continue that discussion, and it's got to be balanced.
It has to be a problem of empowerment or perhaps such things. But as we bring this to an end, what will be your message, especially from your American experience, to Kenyan women who want to break that glass ceiling and they want to say, listen, we want to take over, we want to ensure that our presence is felt?
Be honest. Be honest with your skills. Be honest with yourself. And if you want to contribute to society, do it with integrity.
Yes.
You got to do it honestly. You've got to do it because you're sincere. I mean, that goes across the board with not even gender or women, but with everyone. What we need in our age today is integrity and sincerity, and that very much applies to women, because again, women have changed. We've evolved fantastically. And we have many, many roles. wife and mother are part of that. What's happening with those roles as we become banker, as we become director, as we become doctor, as we become professor? So then what then happens? What then happens to those traditional roles? Because actually what occurs then, because we all live in this economic age, wife and mother was a voluntary role. It has no economic value. It has no wage bill. Now what? What do you do with that? You know, and you got to discuss what's going on there and see where the gaps are, where the benefits are. Okay, there are benefits to you personally. Okay, well, what then happens with the other roles that are expected of women, and how do you fill those gaps?
Thank you very much for sharing your experiences, especially from the American to Kenya, now that you've been in Kenya. And I want to wish you well as you try and articulate perhaps issues to do with women and gender through the power of books. And I'll be reading some of them. Hope you came with some copies so that I go through them. And that's why we'll bring this to an end.
I'll be launching another book. If I could just make called Mind, a Sacred Place.
Yes.
My 3 books are called Meditations, which is my first book of poetry. My second book was called Makonde. These are can be found with Mvule Africa by Mr. Barrick Maluka's publishing house. My third book will be called Mind, a Sacred Place. I've also written and authored a play, which is Peace and Love. There will be 2 shows. We had 2 shows in the tribe January 6th and 7th. There will be 2 shows again, one in Nanyuki, April 30th, and Alliance Francais, May 7th. Do join us for that.
Do join us for that, and I hope we'll get some time to be there so that we go through some of those books and unpacking them. And thank you for getting time to be with us this morning. I want to wish you well as we talk about matters gender. My name is Martin Manja. I've been speaking to a lawyer and an American author for that matter. That is John Second. I'm very particular in terms of pronouncing that name. We want to take a break, and the second part of the interview is coming up next. This is Good Morning Kenya, but that is coming up after this short break. Stay tuned to the program. This is the only way to kickstart your morning.